The Gory Days are here to stay, the 80s horror show. Take a stroll down memory's lane, it's time to start the show. The Gory Days, the Gory Days, the Gory Days, the Gory Days.
On the afternoon of August 16th, 1973, 5 young people in a Volkswagen van ran out of gas on a farm road in South Texas. 4 of them were never seen again. The next morning, the one survivor, Sally Hardesty Enright, was picked up on a roadside blood-caked and screaming murder. Sally said she had broken out of a window in hell. The girl babbled a mad tale, a cannibal family in an isolated farmhouse, chainsawed fingers and bones, her brother, her friends hacked up for barbecue, chairs made of human skeletons. Then she sank into catatonia. Texas lawmen mounted a month-long manhunt but could not locate the macabre farmhouse. They could find no killers and no victims, no facts, no crime. Officially on the records, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre never happened. But during the last 13 years, over and over again, reports of bizarre grisly chainsaw murders have persisted all across the state of Texas. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre has not stopped. It haunts Texas. It seems to have no end. Welcome to the Gory Days, the show where we take a stroll down memory lane to remember some of our favorite movies, horror movies from the 1980s and early 1990s. God, so close. One of these days I'm going to get it. Maybe episode 5, maybe episode 10 if we make it that far. God, I really hope so. Anyway, my name, Kyle Leone, like always, sitting here in this tin can of a recording studio in Los Angeles, California. Whew. I gotta make sure I take bigger breaths before I start this thing. Tin Can, Los Angeles, California, recording studio. You know the blurb. Man, what a week it's been. I don't know why I say that. Some movies came out, some things happened. It was an interesting week, but all the more interesting because of my guest today. A fantastic person has come into my life by some random happenstance. Met him at a wedding shower for a friend of a friend. I'm part of the groom's side. He's part of the bride's side. And we just came together in one of those crazy ways that you meet people out there in the world. He is a writer, a producer, a former film executive, and a consultant. Please welcome Brandon Paine. Welcome to the Gory Days.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
How you doing?
I'm well. I like that the opening read there you had for the title credits there.
Oh yeah, do you recognize it?
I do. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the coolest things about 80s and 90s horror movies is, I don't know how much I'm older than you guys, but you know, it's a very pre-internet thing you could do in horror movies to give that kind of feeling that maybe this thing really did happen. You know, even like looking at Blair Witch Project, you know, is kind of the last time you could do that, where half the audience thought it was real, and they were even as cornball as a movie as this can be. Can't do that anymore. They always talk about the lack of the cell phones and stuff, and how that's troubling to horror movies because it's so easy to get out of danger. But yeah, that's kind of missed too. That feeling of going to the drive-in or something like that, and having some suspicion in the back of your mind that it could be real.
Suspicion. The movie wants to incept into you that it is real,
right.
This did happen, and more importantly, it's happening right now, and it could be happening in this very theater, like that kind of thing. They totally did that.
I think they even cut a scene from the movie where the Sawyer family
goes to a movie theater.
Goes to a movie theater and kills a bunch of people to get meat for their chili.
Yeah, no, on the IMDb they describe that as a gory fest. Just that amazing scene of Tom Savini, I believe was the makeup artist, going nuts, and them unfortunately having to cut all of it. But that's an interesting point, because I don't know if there were any theater crimes or theater shootings and things as then. Certainly not as many as when I say theater shootings now, what comes up in people's minds. But that's interesting that they had the wherewithal to cut it even back in '86.
Yeah, and I will say just a little comment, because I know we're going to make fun of a lot of things in this movie, but Tom Savini is the man. He did a lot of good work on a lot of things, and it's good to keep in mind that he didn't have computers to help him out, and he had to figure out a lot of things on his own, and he's still doing good work today. So shout out to him.
It's really exciting. It's something I've learned since I've started this podcast, that a lot of the people who made these movies are still working today, are still the giants that they were.
Absolutely.
Or have grown into the giants that they wanted to be. Because who's to say that Tom Savini, this is what his big dream was to make a movie theater scene for Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2.
Right. I mean, I haven't looked at his IMDb, but he's had his hands in everything from lots of great filmmakers.
Yeah, so I guess we should introduce you a little bit. I'm Kyle Leone. I'm here every week recording my episodes of the podcast. But who are you, Brandon Paine? We mentioned you're a writer. We mentioned you're a producer, a former film exec. Those are just words.
Right. So I truncated background. I went to film school here in Los Angeles at USC. Studied critical studies, focused a little bit on specifically horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, from the perspective, frankly, that science fiction and fantasy are actually offshoots of horror. And I could go into that for a long time, but the truncated thing would be that I think really good horror has to transform you into a place that you had as a child in which you could be irrationally afraid of things. So I could talk about that for a long time, but I'll get a little past that.
Sure.
After that, I ended up working for, actually the first horror movie I ever worked on was a remake of a movie no one's probably seen called 2001 Maniacs, and they probably didn't see the remake either. But it was very cool because I did get to work with both Freddy Krueger and Jason on that movie, Robert Englund and Kane Hodder.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. They're both very funny, very cool guys.
That's good to know.
Yeah, went on to work at a Sony-based company called Phoenix Pictures in development, which writing's my background. As far as horror films go there, it was more on the high-end stuff. Got to work on things like Black Swan, Zodiac, those kind of horror thriller hybrid, I guess.
Yeah, the ones that bridge the gap.
And then eventually I became director of acquisitions for a company called Shoreline Entertainment. And I went around finding many independent films to sell to TV stations and networks and theaters and distributors and everything all around the world. And many of them were horror and genre films, because genre films and horror films from the independent world are some of the cheaper movies to produce, often don't need movie stars, and therefore can be made a little, or get made a little easier. And then, many of the big independent hits of all time, whether it's Saw or Halloween or it's pretty bad that I only can think of two off the top of my head, but Paranormal Activity. A lot of the biggest hits have always come from the independent world because you can make them for cheap money and have a visceral impact on the audience.
It sounds like you found your passion. It sounds like you love what you do.
Yeah, I like it.
Do you?
I do.
Okay.
I work on...
Because your tone of voice makes it sound like, I get it. It's your job. It's a career. It's hard to enjoy. But do you?
It is, yeah. No, it's hard work trying to structure stories. I am completely a structuralist when it comes to preparing stories. And
do you mean when you approach projects, or in the way that you appreciate movies, or both?
Both. Actually, normally, I didn't do it this time, but normally when I watch movies, I actually start a stopwatch. And whenever a major plot point hits, I tend to look at the clock to see where it is in relation to where I would expect that beat to go, or where I'd want it to go.
Like act-wise, or specifically like time-wise? 22 minutes in, this thing shouldn't happen, but it did.
Both. Now time-wise, in most feature films, your first act break is going to be that 25 to 30-minute mark. There's movies like Patriot Games or something that you have to set up just huge global intrigue, and that might last 45 pages, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. So usually, sometimes it's just going to check the clock at what I think is the midpoint to see where they're at in the movie and to see if they were in the right spot timing wise, if they were off, that kind of thing, if they knew what they were supposed to do with that plot point. That kind of stuff.
Well, Brandon, it's great to have you here. You have a vocabulary that's much more technical with movies than I'm used to or have even enjoyed in the past, but I do appreciate it, and I want to know, how'd you fall into this? Is this what you always wanted to do?
Yeah, I originally went to school to do creative writing. soon thereafter, I do like to read, and I love to read. I read every day, but I soon thereafter learned that I liked movies and television more than I do like to read, and I still love to write, and started taking film classes at USC. Had to reapply to get into film school. I was lucky enough to get into film school, and yeah, I mean, it's a weird business to work in, and it's half the time you're trying to break back into it. But yeah, I like movies. I love telling stories above anything else. I don't know what the future's going to hold in terms of storytelling. If movies as we know it are changing, they certainly seem to be with what Netflix and Hulu's doing, and VR and whatever else. But I think from my perspective, I'm in the storytelling business.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Well, I just actually read a book which is completely irrelevant to this called...
I think the listeners will determine that.
Yeah, what was the name of this book? It was Born to Run. It's actually about a
fiction?
No, nonfiction book about this lost tribe called I'm sure I'm botching the pronunciation and I'm going to look bigoted or something, but I believe the Tarahumara tribe in Mexico, which has been living secluded from humanity for a very long time, and they've secluded themselves since Columbus showed up out of fear of outsiders.
That seems difficult.
It is, especially they're in one of the most dangerous places in the world in terms of drug trafficking. But they stay hidden, kind of from the world. And the thing about them is they're pretty much the greatest distance runners in the world. But they have no interest in
documenting that.
Exactly, because they fear the world. But these guys can outrun pretty much most Olympians. It was an interesting book. Pretty irrelevant, like I said. Though I did just previously, I reread the Writer's Journal, which anyone that wants to write movies or really any type of writing should the Writer's Journey. Which is basically a breakdown of the hero's journey from a writer's standpoint. And there's to make an awkward transition, there is a big time hero's journey in this story.
Yeah.
Oddly structured, certainly in a lot of ways, in that our protagonist is Dennis Hopper, who is very old and still is, and apparently has been old his entire life.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was born old, one of those actors.
It was definitely one of those guys.
But before we get into the movie, I just want to ask you a couple more questions. I want to get a nice round picture of you.
Yeah.
What makes a horror movie good or scary to you?
Okay.
Or is that two different qualifiers?
That's definitely two different qualifiers. Yeah. So far as what makes something scary,
personally,
I mean, for personally. So I'd say a little bit touching on what I mentioned before about being able to bring you into a childhood state to a certain degree. To me, the greatest movie of all time and the greatest horror film of all time is The Shining. And you look at what he did in that.
That's why we're never going to touch that one.
That's a good one not to touch. But it's very calculated that his parents are named Jack and Jill. It's very calculated that he's watching Tom and Jerry on the television. It's very calculated, all these things to remind you of childhood, to bring you back to the state where the world is scary and confusing, and your brain as a child is really quite clever. It's building its own metaphors and allegories with story. As a child, you're dealing with these concepts of burdening sexuality, the separation from the parents, the going off into the unknown. And so if you're able to really, really affect someone psychologically and get them confused in their subconscious, and then play with their most primal needs, like whether that's a mother's love or romantic love, or the fear that no one will ever love them, or the fear that they're going to be alone, or whatever, I think that'll really get you. And one last term I like to use is way to, I think, really get the most people, including myself, would be this term I like to use called cosmic indifference. That Hitchcock really focused on. The best example I could think of is Psycho. it's when the heroine Janet Leigh makes the decision to give the stolen money back, that's when she's killed. So in that world, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, did not care that she made the right decision. And I think that's something that can really get in the back of almost any person's mind and really be not terrific, but terrifying. Is
that where we get the word?
Thought that, that you know that the universe isn't looking out for you, because most films, the universe puts everything into the place and organizes it, and horror is the one genre where you can take it out of that, and the universe doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So you mentioned that a horror movie, if its ability to make its audience remember what it was like to be afraid as a child makes it scary, that isn't necessarily to say that horror movies are aiming at people who haven't gone to a therapist to talk about some of their deep-lying childhood traumas or issues and things, but those people may react more to some of the efforts that filmmakers make to put you back into where you were when you were a confused child surrounded by things that maybe you should have been afraid of but weren't.
Yeah, I don't think it's particularly attacking any specific social norm. I think these are the best horror movies are really playing, I think, off of fears that we all have. And
universal fears.
Universal fears.
Not spiders, not snakes. Loss.
Exactly. And when you were scared of the darkness because it was
unknown.
The unknown is
the
really
other.
Key. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right. The other.
And this movie kind of plays on that too, about the other and, backwoods, podunk, rednecks being this mysterious, crazy element that you can't predict, and you got to watch out for the crazies out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Similar to Deliverance. Just played very differently.
So, that's what makes a horror movie scary. What makes a horror movie good to you?
So good to me, that's a lot of different potential qualifications, because horror, I think, is a very base genre, and this might be a little off topic, but one of the things they teach in screenwriting, which I think is something that shouldn't get focused too much, is that you shouldn't combine genres, and you should know what genre you're doing, what you're sticking to. But I actually think of horror as something of a base genre. You can do a horror comedy, you can do a horror thriller, you can do a lot of things, because the horror to me is more of it's a psychological state that you want to use, and you can do that in a lot of ways. So, I mean, The Evil Dead to me is a great movie. I'm not terrified at any point. Just in the same way that The Exorcist, that might be playing on my fears being raised Catholic, might hit me, as that's more to the childhood type stuff.
That definitely got my dad for the same reasons.
Right. And, but yeah, that's tough to tell, because real horror, especially, not real horror, because it's not like the one's fake, because there's some that can be really intelligent or even social. If you look at what George Romero's movies are, I mean, he's probably good at terrifying you physically as well as getting that social aspect. Or Get Out does that too, in a modern way. So I think there's a lot of ways to make a great horror movie. As far as just getting the fear, I don't know if you know that horror comes from either a Latin word or a French word. I don't know. I don't have my finger on it to know, but it's that which makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
I did not know that.
Comes from.
I'm going to act like I did for the future of this podcast.
So I think there's a number of ways you can make a good horror film. From a sales perspective, if you're making a horror film and you're making an independent horror film and there isn't a horror set piece in the first 10 minutes, then the people you're going to send that movie to are going to turn it off. So I'd keep that in mind.
That's actually really good to know.
Make sure you establish a genre. Usually, horror films, if you're familiar with the Save the Cat method or anything as a screenwriter, that usually the opening image is usually a horrific scene. Think, Mike Myers, the tracking shot at the beginning of Halloween.
Michael Myers, of course you mean.
Right. Not the Scottish comedian. But it's almost similar to a James Bond movie in that sense, where the opening image is usually him in an action set piece that really has relatively little to do with the plot. However, in a good horror movie, as with good screenplay structure, you're going to have an ending shot that's going to show the opposite of that opening shot. And in Halloween, that case would be you're at the same house that he was when he first became a murderer, and Donald Pleasance looks outside and he's no longer there.
I mean, movies used to do this. Maybe they still do it, and it's just more subtle. But like the Indiana Jones movies, you think about how the opening scene is him finishing adventure that we didn't get to enjoy the entirety of. He's just doing the tail end of it and getting away. And the movie is never going to go back and go, well, let's look at why he was there and things, because we knew that this is just setting up our genre. He's an adventure hero. Let's see him do adventuring. Some of the superhero movies will still open with whoever the superhero is, Captain America or Wonder Woman, saving some people in a unique situation that we don't have all the information to. They're there and they have to do their job and save the day.
Yeah, I want to just go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark for a second, because there's actually another point he does right after that I think is brilliant, and which is this first scene, like you mentioned, is set up in where you look at a traditional screenplay structure. This is the setup phase, right, where you want to get all the characters from the A story together. The B story being usually the love interest that comes at either the end of the first act or the beginning of the second act, but it's not always the love interest. It's really that character that teaches your protagonist the lesson that they're going to eventually learn to grow. But getting back to Indiana Jones, when you set up that setup at the beginning, you usually want to hit three things, which is work, play, and home. And Raiders of the Lost Ark does that really well, because it establishes that scene you mentioned before with, obviously running from the ball is his work, but the other half of his work is he's a college professor. And so we cut to him in college, but he's finishing the lecture, because we don't really care about archaeology. But you have a girl looking at him. She's obviously in love with them. She closes her eyes. She says, "Love you," written on the island.
Classic.
And that scene probably plays for 30 seconds and establishes him as a character just so well. And the dropping the apple on the table and not saying anything and leaving. I just love that scene, how it sets it up, because it goes right into that call for action the next scene when they tell him about the Ark being lost. I really love the setup to that movie.
Yeah, no. It's something that I do applaud older movies for, I guess for all intents and purposes, being more ham-fisted with that intro.
Right.
And being just like, here's our hero, this is what he does, this is what he's all about, let's have fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Economy of dialogue and economy of writing is what I call it. Get it in and out as fast as you can, as long as you convey it correctly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that kind of tangentially moves us to the movie that we watched for this week's podcast. Listeners, of course, know that this week we watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, also known as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, as it was marketed heavily at the time. This movie was released theatrically in the United States by Cannon Films on Friday, August 22nd, 1986. It had a budget at the time of $4.7 million. Do you want to guess how much it grossed?
Let's see. I know, I'm going to guess that it's made its money on the video market afterwards, because I know it became a pretty good cult hit. But I don't think it probably grossed more than 5 to 10 in the theaters.
Ooh. Opening weekend, it grossed $2,822,439 and some change. It did not make its nut at opening weekend.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. The home video sales exploded as this movie got a cult following, and it made $8,725,000 and some change.
And that's one of the biggest problems that's facing the movie business, is the lack of home video sales.
It doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't. That's a huge market that's gone.
Yet they still sell them at like Best Buy and things. I still spend time walking up and down the aisles looking at the movies.
I still have a giant collection of DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that.
You still have VHSs?
I do have some VHSs, yeah, totally.
They were bigger. The titles took up more space. It was nice.
There might be a Laserdisc or a Betamax even somewhere, But yeah, it feels like such a waste.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's something that, I mean, the posters are still lovingly designed and things, but there was a point in time where the posters were designed to kind of mislead. They would show you some one tiny element of the movie so that kids and teens and people walking through Blockbuster would see the ghoulie popping out of a toilet and go, well, that's what this movie's all about. I should rent this. They'd go home and find out that it's about a teenager trying to summon demons the entire time.
Right. Yeah, you can't. I think that it's a change in marketing. It seems like those type of stories that are non-high concept horror films, meaning you can't explain them in one or two sentences. That seems like Netflix and Hulu.
The elevator pitch.
Exactly. Like something like Get Out, where it's black people made slaves again, or
period.
Yeah, or Happy Death Day. It's Groundhog's Day as a horror movie. Things like that. You can hook an audience. You can get people to come in pretty effectively. Something like It probably wouldn't have been as easy to sell if it didn't have a pre-existing material behind
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
It's almost about getting clickbaity headlines in people's minds more than what the movie might be about.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
and that's always been.
It is also is a great example of that, bringing you back to childhood to get fears thing. The idea of a scary clown. That's why scary clowns work so well. That's like putting those children in danger has always, to me, given me more of an impact. That's why The Exorcist works for me. The Omen from like the backwards sense, because he's the demon, and Children of the Corn in that same regard. But putting children always seems to get an effect on me, because it's always tough with the sexy, great shape 25-year-old college football player running from the killer, because he should have a fighting chance. When it's a 5-year-old, it's a little different.
Mm-hmm. And plus, there's the kind of unspoken rule that children are safe in movies, in horror movies. If a child shows up, he's probably going to be fine. That's what makes events like Alien, the second most recent Alien, the one where he comes to Earth. I think that's Alien versus Predator 2. Anyway, there's a scene in the second most recent Alien where the alien comes into a maternity ward, and all of the 9 months pregnant women in there can't move, are screaming as an alien slowly approaches a pregnant woman. And I'm thinking the whole time, I'm like, she's going to be fine. Someone's going to come in and save her. He sticks his second mouth down her throat and impregnates her baby in there. And so there's a scene when the heroes come upon the maternity ward and find these women, all of their chests burst because their babies have been turned into aliens.
This is Alien versus Predator 2?
I'm pretty sure that's what it's called, and it managed to actually break the rule so far that not only are babies not safe, not only are infants not safe, fetuses aren't safe.
That was already the problem they had with Alien 3 that kind of tanked the franchise, was killing Newt between Aliens and Alien 3.
Chucky, the newest Cult of Chucky on Netflix, he stabs a pregnant woman and makes her paraplegic. Actually, that was the 2014 Curse of Chucky, but the sequel still reacts to it.
Well, actually,
kids aren't safe.
Kids aren't safe, but also I was just thinking with Alien as well. You're mentioning the alien going to the maternity ward, because the screenwriter of the original Alien, I'm paraphrasing it, but he made a quote to the effect of, I wanted to rape the audience in every way I could, because he was in a very dark place in his life. And
Jesus.
So if you look at, the H.R. Geiger, who's the famous artist that did all the designs.
They're beautiful.
There's a lot of those vaginal and phallic imagery all through those movies. Obviously the face hugger, and I'm not going to get too graphic with all that stuff, but, like, the face hugger is raping him in the mouth, and there was the reverse rape when it pops out, and all this other, because he was just basically writing angry, as I understood.
No, Alien is a psychosexual adventure that's, it makes you sick in a way that you don't understand why when you first see it for the first time. Like, the chest burster is gross, but what you're talking about, the reverse rape of it,
Yeah, that was actually the first movie I ever had a nightmare of.
Oh.
I wasn't that scared of it, actually.
Mine was
watching
Chucky.
It. That's interesting. That would get me.
I was afraid of dolls for years.
Yeah, when I was really little, what really scared me was that Disney's The Headless Horseman. That I had to run one of the TV thrown out of the house.
Chernabog from Fantasia. Disney knew how to scare kids back then.
Did, man. They're good storytellers.
Absolutely.
In general, but Yeah, that, and then I remember walking downstairs to get a glass of water, and my parents were watching The Shining. I think I saw 5 seconds of Jack Nicholson's eyebrows while I was walking down the hallway carrying carrying an axe, and that got me.
That one's pretty scary.
Yeah, I wasn't able to watch it until I grew up.
So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, we
Yes.
watched it today. I just like to talk about a little bit of what was going on in the world when the movie came out.
All right.
The year was 1986, designated as the International Year of Peace under the United Nations. Manhunter, directed by Michael Mann, was one of the most watched movies in 1986, while Red Storm Rising by Tom Clancy was one of the best-selling books. Following a number of trouble-free years in space exploration, the Space Shuttle Challenger explodes shortly after takeoff, watched by people live on TV around the world. The worst ever nuclear disaster occurs as the Chernobyl nuclear power station explodes, causing the release of radioactive material across Europe. In the UK, commonly known as cow disease, is identified, which causes many deaths over the next few years and a major reform in farming practices. Gas. A gallon of gas was 89 cents. The Nintendo Entertainment System had come out just a scant 3 months earlier, just as My Buddies dolls debuted, which of course later inspired Chucky in the 1988 Child's Play movie and series. Some of the movies, if you were a kid at the time, you might have been seeing would be Stand By Me, the Transformers movie, Howard the Duck, Top Gun, Platoon, The Karate Kid 2, Star Trek 4, and maybe Aliens, the second one, 1986, Aliens. The other movies that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 had to compete with on the day it released, Night of the Creeps and Extremities. So it was actually up against other horror movies, other B movies at least.
And this, of course, was the aliens of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man. So the opening blurb that I read in the beginning when we started is what starts off all the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies because, like we explained, it incites this idea that not only did this happen, it's happening now, and it could be happening in your very town, or at least in Texas towns. And so...
Like the brilliant last shot of Halloween where it just shows a whole bunch of houses. It could be yours.
He could be in your house.
Yeah, you know, that was just a bunch of cutting room footage they had of different houses in the community, and that was, as I understand, the editor's idea. I don't want to say whose it was, but that wasn't in the script, and they decided to put that in there.
But
at the end. I think it was a perfect ending.
I see the strings here.
Yeah.
So all lies. None of this happened. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not real. None of the people explained in it exist or are real. What is real is Ed Gein.
Right.
And so what this movie and a lot of other movies did was take the sensationalized story of Ed Gein, specifically the fact that he mutilated his victims into furniture, and just ran with it for years. You mentioned Psycho earlier. Psycho, inspired by Ed Gein.
They nod to that here with their dead mother with a chainsaw on her arms.
Yeah. Great grandma up in the clock or tower or whatever that place is. It's like an amusement park where they're at.
It seemed like it was like a condemned carnival.
It's like a roadside attraction kind of thing. Yeah, like come see the world's largest ball of yarn. Anyway, yeah, Ed Gein was a real person in history. He was a serial killer who, let's see, I have a little blurb on here. Edward Thomas Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, was an American murderer and body snatcher. His crimes committed around the hometown of Plainfield, Wisconsin, gathered widespread notoriety after authorities discovered that Gein had exhumed corpses from local graveyards and fashioned trophies and keepsakes from their bones and skin. This story has obviously had a lasting effect on American pop culture. The tale first came to widespread public attention in the fictionalized version presented by Robert Bloch in the 1959 suspense novel Psycho. Gein has obviously influenced a lot of characters like Norman Bates from Psycho, Leatherface from this movie, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. The list honestly continues to this day. The idea of a serial killer who not only eats their people, because that's scary enough, but uses their body, abuses their dead body for their weird things. I feel like this... For clothing, for lampshades, for chairs, for a chandelier, for decoration. The idea that even after the monster has killed you, it's not done with you, and after it's like an unholy taking of like, okay, you got me, now I'm dead. Isn't that enough? No, I have to flay you and use you as a chair for decades. Right. I want you to be a fixture in my basement. The
ultimate in dehumanizing somebody. Yeah.
Quite literally,
turning them into an actual
into
object.
A sofa.
Yeah.
So
again, not a nice man, but he sure does make great for illusion and metaphor.
So what I was curious about is, did Robert Bloch buy the life rights to Ed Gein to write this movie? I imagine he was still alive at the time, still in prison. So in my research, I learned that as long as someone is still alive, there's a lot of legal hoops you have to go through to get the rights to tell their life story. But when they die, you could essentially sit down and write a biography about George Washington that paints him as a child molester and a person who eats fecal matter, and the Washington estate could do nothing to stop you. I found that horribly fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like Citizen Kane with William Randolph Hearst, or the Master with Philip Seymour Hoffman doing the L. Ron Hubbard kind of a role. Yeah, that I don't know if you have to buy the life rights of and my assumption would be that if you're making it as different as what it was and you're changing the names to the characters, that I can't imagine there'd be a legal battle over that.
Because the one thing that you could point at is, oh, there are shots of people as furniture. But that's not even really Leatherface's MO. It's not clear if he's the one that's making that. Yeah, they're just kind of there.
I don't think he trademarked the skin furniture, so I don't know.
No.
Yeah, I mean, and Psycho came out before. I don't know if they had to get the rights or whatnot. And they don't none of them refer to the man as Ed Gein. And Buffalo Bill certainly not, too. So my guess is that I doubt there was too many legal...
No, because you can't put a legal patent on an act. Like running on a bunch of turtles is not a life story that I can't recreate. If a criminal ran over a bunch of turtles and got put in prison for it, you could make that movie where someone runs over a bunch of cats, and that's not infringing on something. I don't know why I picked something so horrible as my example, but that's where my mind goes.
I mean, we're talking about Ed Gein. He made like a belt out of nipples, so I think killing a couple cats
among other things
isn't the worst possible thing.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about is, before we get into the recap really quick, is the idea that Leatherface is one of the more nuanced horror. So people think of the horror pantheon of the 80s, the big names: Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers. Leatherface is pretty firmly up there. I would even argue Chucky the Doll. And then there's some more from there that...
Candyman, stuff like that.
Who you could argue for. So Leatherface, though, of all of them, is arguably not incomprehensibly evil.
Right.
It seems like even Jason, even though it's like, oh, they killed me and I'm getting revenge, he's still just firmly, no matter what, he is evil. Leatherface, on the other hand, and the last thing I want to do is empathize with a serial killer, but the point I'm trying to make is Leatherface is consistently portrayed as a person with severe mental problems, with severe mental illness, and his family, who also suffer from severe mental illness, take monstrous advantage of him and order him to do unspeakable things, thus furthering his mental degradation. And as somebody with diagnosed depression and anxiety, I do respond to characters.
As well, so we're on the same page.
Okay, yeah, I do respond to characters with mental struggles and things, and it's unfortunate. I mean, it's an early movie, obviously, and the thing that they're getting toward is the fear of the other and the crazies. But what's being displayed here is a family with multiple personality disorder, maybe even schizophrenia, diagnosable diseases, treatable diseases. What do you think about that? What do you think about Hollywood's portrayal of the crazies?
Yeah, so I think talking about those big four, just really quickly, I'd say that Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees are ultimates. They are, the boogeyman, the
I see,
ephemeral, scary thing that lives under every child's bed, that kind of thing. So I think that's really getting you when you're like getting you back to that childhood state where you're just literally afraid of the boogeyman. I mean, and they call Michael Myers the boogeyman several times in many of the Hollywood
But is like
movies.
A revenant, a thing that will not stop and will get you, and you can't understand.
So yeah, I mean, I think it definitely, Wild Bill and Norman...
Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill. The stuntman wasn't such a bad guy. But yeah, Norman Bates and all the characters based on it again all have degrees of sympathy. I mean, Norman Bates is even the hero of the sequels, or a hero of the sequels. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, with that one, the image that comes to mind is obviously the putting the face on her to hide her.
To quote unquote hide her, but
well, that is the biggest what the fuck moment, right? Is the dancing scene, I guess, between him and her.
That's the biggest. We'll get to it, but yeah.
Okay, well, maybe for me,
For you.
That was definitely
Sorry.
what the fuck. To me, I think it was an homage to Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh.
That was what I was taking it for.
I thought it was some of Tobe Hooper's patented black comedy he was so proud of.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And we'll get to that too.
Yeah, we'll get to the black comedy.
But what were you saying about mental illness portrayals of these villains that are ostensibly not magic? They're people.
Right. So I'd obviously say that these aren't great portrayals of true mental illness. Yeah, I mean, good villains don't consider themselves the villain. So in that degree, I think they had something going there. I don't know how committed they were to clarifying each of their mental illnesses, and that's probably what falls apart to a certain extent.
Because they had no intention to.
Yeah.
They had no intention to sit down and have a talking scene between his dad and Leatherface, or I guess it's his older brother and Leatherface.
It's hard to tell the family relations. The
I think
assumption
that's on
is
purpose.
the cook is the dad.
Yeah.
But
I feel like it reflects the medical practices at the time of the 80s. The idea that mental illness is an annoyance more than an actual affliction. It's something that you take people and you bury them away in a place, in an institution where they're being electroshocked, and it doesn't really matter. They're the outcasts in the fringe of society. They've been pushed away. So to reflect the idea that medicine at the time wasn't concerned with identifying mental illness, the movies capitalize on our lack of knowledge and fear, the unknown.
that's really interesting. I didn't think about it that way, but also historically at that time, that's when the mental homes were being shut down during the Reagan era, is where a lot of our homeless came from and stuff like that.
One problem leads to another.
Yeah. So so that's interesting. So there was a lot more mentally ill people on the streets coming out of that time. Obviously, most mentally ill people, I think we have to note, are not psychopathic murderers.
Oh, absolutely. No, they're us. They're people. I think recent shows like Lady Dynamite on Netflix and things have done a fantastic job of shedding light on the realities of it. Even Transparent have really demonstrated how nuanced it is. How it's not, that's an anxious person. Look at them. I can tell because of all of the lightning bolts coming out of their head. They're so anxious. No, that's a person.
Right.
And yeah, it's much grayer than that. It's 5,000 shades of gray. Yeah. So the last thing I want to say is this movie's legacy. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an American horror franchise consisting of 8 horror films, multiple comics, and a video game adaptation of the original 1974 film. But I want to talk about the chronology for these sequels. It's bananas. So the original comes out in, it's called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Then the second one comes out, the one that we watched, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, 1986, followed by Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 in 1990. Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation comes out in 1994.
No, that's the Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger one.
Yes.
I love that terrible movie.
So, ending there, these 4 movies make up the base chronology from the 1974 movie. Essentially, after Texas Chainsaw Massacre TNG, The Next Generation, the story ends because in 2003, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes out. A reboot.
Right.
Completely unrelated to any other story. This is the first time a story about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has occurred. 3 years later, in 2006, they make the Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning, a prequel to the 2003 remake. Then they decide, forget it. We're done with that reboot stuff. We're going to do, I don't know what else to call it. It's a pre-boot. They make a movie called it's just called Texas Chainsaw 3D in 2013. Texas Chainsaw 3D is a direct sequel to the 1974 original and makes no reference to any of the past films. So it's unclear if this movie takes place between the 1974 and this 1986 one, or if it's replacing the 1986 one and erases all of those. But it gets worse from there, because in 2017, they make a movie called Leatherface that's about Leatherface as a little boy. And it's like Hannibal Rising. It's that story. It's Hollywood has gotten really interested in the bad guy's story. Let's hear Maleficent's perspective. Let's see what the good witch, or the Elphaba, the bad witch, what she was doing. There's even like an Ursula book I've seen that's about, well, Ursula's side tells it different from the Little Mermaid. So,
or the Wicked.
Yeah, Wicked, exactly. So officially, the chronology is a 2017 movie, then you go back to a 1974 movie, then you go to a 2013 movie, then you go to a 1986 movie.
Right.
And it's just bananas.
Yeah, the only thing, you got to do one on Wes Craven's New Nightmare. That's the only thing that's more of a mind
it really is.
I mean, that's got to be a great lead up to what Scream was, being ultra meta. Scream, I think, condensed it a little more.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, controlled it a bit more.
So this was directed by Tobe Hooper.
It was.
He was a pretty great filmmaker.
The quote-unquote director of Poltergeist.
He did Poltergeist, he did Invaders from Mars, he did Spontaneous Combustion, which I've actually heard a lot about on other podcasts. We'll probably do that at some point. But yeah, Tobe Hooper, did you want to talk a little bit about him?
Sure. I mean, I think this movie is, along with most of the other movies you listed on that list, are pretty definitive proof that Steven Spielberg directed Poltergeist.
I saw that on TV the other day. I saw the scene where the kids' braces attack him and the family. Still pretty effective.
Poltergeist is a great movie. As I understand, I don't remember what it was now, but Spielberg had directed a movie earlier that year, and because of some sort of weird DGA rules, it would have counted as him directing two movies at once if he got the credit for Poltergeist. And so he had Tobe Hooper directing, but as I understood, he was on set all day, pretty much in charge of everything.
That seems like a good situation for Tobe Hooper.
Yeah, it makes it look like Poltergeist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
and he gets the credit.
He's not a bad filmmaker. He certainly must have been on a lot of drugs for this film.
It might make more sense to know that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was a 3-picture deal, that it was one of those things where it's like, it kind of doesn't matter if it's good or not, because it's the middle of 3 that he had to make. He made Canon Films approached Hooper with a 3-picture deal to make Life Force, 1985, Invaders from Mars, 1986, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, 1987. So that was it was the third of 3, but still.
Hey, 3-picture studio deal. That's a good life.
So just like the original, this movie had a tumultuous relationship with the MPAA. When it got released, it was given an X rating, which essentially is a death sentence for movies. So that's what led to the movie being released as an unrated picture. But
technically, X is unrated. As a little breakdown of the MPAA, is it's a little complicated how it works, and frankly, it's not very fair. I don't know how much you know about it, so you can just stop me if I'm explaining too much. But the way the MPAA, I don't know if it still works this way, but when it was incepted, basically it's a group of parents, couples of different races, that screen the film and determine in order to determine what children should be able to see. Now, originally the ratings were G, PG, and R. And actually it was Spielberg that lobbied, I believe, because of Gremlins and Raiders of the Lost Ark that were coming out about the same time, because he didn't want to get an R rating, which would be PG-13. Now, the way we come up with the idea of the X rating is if they did not approve the movie for release, they would simply drew an X over it.
Okay.
And so XXX, which we call, I think, of porno, is that's just a made-up concept of if you did X over and over again. But unrated would be an actual rating that the MPA would have given. They obviously added NC-17 at one point. However, there was a big backlash from conservative groups and eventually getting mall theaters to pull anything with NC-17 rating from the theaters.
That's what the death sentence was.
That's what it really was, yeah, because they were trying to make movies for a brief period of time that it actually came from Midnight Cowboy, which was a movie that was not given a rating, and then it was nominated for Best Picture, and at that point, the MPA got a little embarrassed, and they gave it a subsequent R rating. And that's when they actually created NC-17 in order to be able to make more European movies.
This movie definitely would have been NC-17 if there had been one. The posters and previews and things were adorned with this big, bold, capital letter statement that says, no one under 17 will be admitted into this picture.
Right. So, yeah,
which makes you go, ooh, this is going to be good.
Though I will point out that it is unfair with the MPA if you think about what I said of being these couples on different races. Essentially, I don't really have a problem when it comes to G, PG, PG-13, but when it comes to R, I do have an issue with groups of people that are kind of similar being the only ones that decide what anyone can see. Because if you don't get an R rating, the movie essentially can't come out. And if you're only interested in people that are married, have children, obviously are straight, and are a certain age group, and them representing what I can see, that I don't have I'm not a big fan of. Them determining what children can see, fine.
That's pretty monopolistic.
It's a little weird. Not a big fan of it.
Because it's not a government agency. It's not the federal MPAA, right?
No, it's not. I might be misremembering this, but I'm pretty sure they made a deal in order that they'd be policing themselves.
Well, because then you get to a point of the government interrupting art, and people that's kind of a problem.
Right.
But in America, where movies can incite riots and inspire crazies, and
right.
I mean, I say crazies now, but you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, like Natural Born Killers and the spree that came after that and all that kind of stuff. Though I don't think you can blame that stuff on the movies.
No, it's like blaming video games for children's violence and things, and the government shouldn't be involved in that. Though more than one party should be involved in that, you know?
I agree, yeah, or at least people with different perspectives.
Yeah, if there was a second MPAA that you could compare and go, well, the MPAA rated that G, but the different one rated it 13 or something like that, like how Britain does it. They just use numbers to determine ages.
Yeah, I think that would be a better way to go, because I don't like the cutoff at the R. That's, I think, a problem I have.
Would you lobby for more nuance in the higher area? So you got G, PG, PG-13, PG-16, PG-18, R-, R, R+.
I mean, for me, I'm not, I just really don't think most kids, if they see an R-rated movie, are going to be that scarred by it personally, but I'm not a parent. So, for other parents to determine
So who are you to say?
Exactly, who am I to say? But, if you're making, some movie to incite violence or something, then that's one thing. But I don't, if you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you just start having a family that cooks people, I don't think that's going to be
This is not an H.P. Lovecraft thing where people who see it will immediately go insane and kill each other kind of thing.
Right.
So last thing I'll go over before we get into we'll take a quick break and then we'll go into the recap,
Awesome.
is the marketing efforts for this movie. The poster, of course, is on the podcast here, but if you haven't seen it, it resembles the Breakfast Club poster. A bizarre decision. It looks like a joke.
I did not notice. You guys show me a picture.
I'll have to. Yeah, I will. It's Leatherface, the dad, Chop Top, the grandpa, and the corpse. And they're
the corpse of was it JB or?
Well, you know the corpse that they're using in the beginning to chainsaw the teen. It's that corpse. Is on the floor being Molly Ringwald. So it's the Breakfast Club poster. Weird decision to do that with the tagline, "After 10 years, the buzz is back." Capitalizing on people remembering this movie from that far ago.
It's John Hughes would be proud.
It was after a decade of silence, the buzz is back, playing on the sound motif. When we come back, we're going to get into the recap, talking about some of the scenes, what happened in the movie, what we thought of some of them. We'll break down a little bit of that, then we'll get into our analysis, and finally our rating. When we come back to the Gory Days.
The Gory Days.
Welcome back to the Gory Days. Kyle Leone here, my guest Brandon Paine, and we watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, the 1986 1987 classic directed by Tobe Hooper. Let's get into it. So this movie tells the story of a radio DJ by the name of Stretch. She is a female radio DJ that works at the, what is it called? I had it written down there. K. Oakley, Red River Rock and Roll Request Line. She works there at nights, where I imagine she's sitting at the booths taking requests from all over. In fact, this night she gets a request from some rowdy teens. The first thing we see is some teenagers driving down the road in a car, and one of them has a gun, and they're shooting at signs and things, and it's literally the epitome of teen delinquency on display here. They decide to call in the radio show, and they won't hang up because, I don't know, is this a thing on radios that radios can't hang up on their callers? That seems like a big not plot hole, but hole for radio stations. That seems like a good way to get taken off the air, because some guy won't stop saying Baba Booey, Baba Booey.
Right. The most interesting thing I find with those two characters is how many archetypes are thrown together there. They're
Corneli Buzz and Rick the Prick are the two teens.
Are their names? That's great. Because they're obviously meant to be like that archetype of the Lacoste wearing frat boy.
The posh.
They got the rich boy thing because they have the car phone.
Yeah, that's right.
That's money. That means
you don't think
rich.
about that.
Yeah, why they have the gun, I don't know. And
because they're Texans.
They're Texans, but also the glasses.
They got those novelty holographic glasses.
I don't know if he was supposed to be on acid or what was going on.
I'm sure there's drunk driving implied.
They're going to an OU Texas thing, which is a great setup for how campy the movie's going to be.
It's the big overarching event. It's the big thing that's going on this weekend that makes the local authorities want to prevent getting this out. It's like the Jaws logic. But anyway, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Yeah. These two decide to play chicken with a truck while they're on the air because they think this will be hilarious. And sure enough, that same truck finds them on a bridge and plays a little chicken of their own. This chicken, however, involves a chainsaw because what comes up from the top of that truck is a corpse with a black tarp on the back of it. And I quite honestly thought what they were going for was that's a guy and that's going to attack, and there was a big black tarp, and I was sitting there and I was like, this is bad. This is the standard for the movie effects here. I can see the tarp behind, but then they subvert it because they managed to knock off the corpse's head, and behind the corpse under the tarp that was very visible is Leatherface. So I thought that was a good scare.
I like that. It still felt a little dated, but yeah, I like it. I think I wrote down, my note was it's a unmasking, which I thought was unique.
Yeah, what do you mean?
You pull off this corpse, or was it a full-on corpse?
I'm pretty sure it was a corpse.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they pull off the corpse to reveal to reveal him, but he's still wearing his Leatherface mask.
But that is his face.
Yeah, you rip off his mask and he's got a mask on. But no, I liked it. I also think Leatherface, one of the ballsiest of the killers, because he's not like Jason where he can't really die, and he's not going for the low-hanging fruit. He's got the armed college kids driving down the freeway that he's going to kill, not just the prom girl running around the forest. So he's got some balls in this one.
And at this point, it's kind of unclear if they're just like taking revenge on them for playing the chicken game and embarrassing them, or if this is what Leatherface likes to do. He likes to hide in the back of cars and chainsaw people as they're driving. So that's what happens is we get our first death is Corneli Buzz gets part of his head chopped off. Now, unfortunately, we don't actually see the actual like blade cutting his head. All we get is some implied like, oh, he's chainsawing the door, and then the car gets away. Then Rick the Prick turns and he's like, hey, we got away, and it's like, uh-oh, his head's falling off and there's blood squirting everywhere, and it was pretty gross. The important thing is that they were still on the air with K. Oakley, and so their entire death was not broadcasted but recorded on the phone at the station there. So Stretch and her producer LG decide to just end the night there, I guess, and then the next day the crime scene where they crashed, and we're introduced to our hero, Lieutenant Enright, played by Dennis Hopper.
Lefty Enright, right?
That's right. Later he says, "Call me Lefty," for no reason at all. Right. But there's some subtle lines here that imply he's related to the people who died in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
That's how he was the father of the girl, as I understand.
Yeah, and the brother of the guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that part. Okay,
he was the uncle of the girl and the brother of the guy.
Right.
So it's also thrown out that one of the other officers there explains, hey, this is a big weekend for us. People come from all over, not just for football, but just, riots, blah, 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 and I can't calm them down. And if you're going to go around spreading chainsaw stuff, it's Jaws logic. The movie, what I mean by that is in the movie Jaws, when the first person to realize there was a killer shark announced it to anyone with authority, I believe it's the mayor himself who says, I'm keeping those beaches open. This is 4th of July weekend, the biggest moneymaker. Money's more important than lives. So that's like kind of what this is going for, but it's not really brought up again that the reason I don't want you spreading this actual news is because it could affect our publicity. It doesn't seem to, because what happens is Stretch comes to Dennis Hopper's hotel room, where it is a madhouse. In fact, there's like a little implied rape where the two drunk cowboys were gonna come after her, but then saw Dennis Hopper and backed off. Yeah, just like right off the bat, we're getting that, Stretch is a sex symbol. Everyone wants Stretch. LG, her producer, kind of has like a weird sexual tension with her at some point.
Just a little mention, I think, in the radio station, the sports guy is actually a country music star named Kinky Friedman.
Really?
Point that out. My dad's a big friend of his. He's kind of a satirist country star. He wrote songs like "They Don't Make Jews Like Jesus Anymore." Now, before he gets too offensive, he was Jewish. And
okay.
It was a satire. But,
kind of like Short People.
Right. So, anyways, yeah, that was a fun little cameo for me to point out.
That is fun. So Stretch mentions in the hotel room that this is a chance for me to stop playing headbanging music and do something real. I think that's so weird for that to be her motivation. That it's almost two separate motivations she reveals in the same sentence. This is a chance for me to stop playing headbanging music, full stop. She wants to be more than just a DJ that works nights doing request lines. What that is, I don't know. Maybe she wants to be a news anchor. Maybe she wants to be a better radio request DJ on a bigger station. But then she caveats it with, and do something real. Something real like report a crime and help local law enforcement do something, which wouldn't necessarily catapult her career. So what is her motivation for wanting to help?
That's interesting, because also one of my other favorite weird parts was when she goes with the direct evidence to Dennis Hopper, who for some reason is not interested in it in any way.
Who doesn't want her help.
No.
He conveyed to the other officer that I need to get an all-points bulletin on this event so that any witnesses can give me info. And the first one that does, he says, I don't need your help, and tries to push her away and get drunk instead.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out that her playlist as a DJ, so my thought of moving on to something else, she was not a good DJ. So her playlist at one point in the movie was The Chainsaw Murder in full, followed by, no one commented on this, but they played the national anthem
the Star-Spangled Banner, which is supposed to close out the recording day.
Right, but then they play generic 80s rock music after that.
She's playing more music.
Which I thought was a very weird set
Now, was
list.
that on the air, or was that just for her? Like, I'm going to hang out and wait for Lefty.
Well, if she's hanging out to the Star-Spangled Banner, she might have more issues in the Sawyer family, but yeah.
So then we jump to the Texas-Oklahoma chili cook-off.
Yes.
Where apparently it's held in the same hotel that so this is something I'm really bad at on the show. I want to get better. I want to choose between saying the actors' names or the characters' names. Let's stick with the characters' names. So We've got Lefty, aka Lieutenant Enright. We've got Stretch, the DJ. And now we are introduced to Drayton Sawyer, the man who wins the chili Oklahoma cook-off for the second year in a row. And the award person asks, now you got to tell us this year, what's your secret? And he's just like, prime meat. I have an eye for good meat. And everyone's just like, oh, that's good enough. Ha ha ha, yay.
Right.
I mean, why would you ever bat an eye at a chili cook-off? You wouldn't think anything. Then it jumps to Dennis Hopper going to a chainsaw store, dropping down
chainsaw store.
$1,000 for 3 chainsaws.
So,
tell me about this scene.
Yeah, I feel like we could talk for an hour about the chainsaw store.
Right.
To me, that's the centerpiece of the movie. Not a hardware store; it's a chainsaw store.
Specifically.
Now, this is a dark comedy, and it makes me wonder: is that part of the joke?
I've written down some of the things that I was curious were or were not black comedies. That didn't make the list.
Okay, so what the very next scene is when he goes to the radio station. With the radio station, which I accepted, I guess, because it's in Texas, but was above a gun store. So the very next place he passes after going to the chainsaw store sold the items that would have made his journey a lot easier. That I noticed, but the chainsaw store
had a weird clerk as well.
Very weird clerk.
Do you remember how excited he was to see him misusing the chainsaws?
Yes. I don't know if it's a cultural thing by me not being in Texas enough or how often people buy chainsaws, but the chainsaw emporium they had there seemed a little unnecessary for a small town.
He had a huge selection.
Very big selection. Really the best in chainsaws.
Best in town.
I would have loved to see his infomercial.
And he's like finishing up a conversation with someone on the phone saying, I don't know where your husband is and you better stop calling me. And it's so long and so audible. I was curious, like, oh, is that an implication of Leatherface got that guy too? But it really doesn't seem like it. It seems just like local color.
Yeah, I think it was Leatherface got that guy too, and I think it's more brilliant police work by Lefty to not ask if anyone else has been buying chainsaws at the chainsaw store.
He's in a trance when he gets there.
This doesn't seem like a big community. I feel like if there is a chainsaw store, that's probably where most chainsaws are sold. So you probably find your villains there a little easier.
Anyway, we move on for there where Lefty goes to the radio station, like you said, and says, I want you to play that tape live. And he explains that he wants her to play it both to prove to other law enforcement that it's real, but then also to maybe draw out more witnesses and more information and things. But what he was really doing, which he reveals later in kind of a throwaway line, is that he wanted the killers to come and get her. Not that so he could catch them there, but so he could follow them back to their lair. That's pretty evil.
Yeah.
That was this police officer's plan, to catch the people who killed his daughter and brother. Right. So I feel like there's this subtle subplot, and I say subtle because of the movie's ability to make it clear. I feel like there's a subplot of Dennis Hopper degrading. Because at the end, he's a madman running around chopping through support beams and things. And I feel like this is supposed to show his descent into madness a little bit, that he used an innocent woman to lure the killers for his revenge plot. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So what happens is Drayton, the guy who won the chili cook-off, hears the radio broadcast, and Stretch ends up alone at the station after LG leaves, the producer. So Stretch is alone, and she finds a stranger sitting in the recording studio. Who's that stranger?
The stranger sitting in the Oh, right.
It's Chop Top.
Chop Top. Bill Moseley.
Bill Moseley putting out
Horror
a pretty,
icon.
a great performance. A really long, tense scene of Chop Top being a crazy guy and Stretch reacting to it in a way that was pretty realistic. That I can tell this guy is dangerous. He's eating himself. He's lighting a hanger, scratching his head, and then picking the chunks off and eating those. He's visibly dangerous. So her plan is to give him be respectful until he leaves. And it's a theme I see in a lot of horror movies. This worship of decorum, that something bizarre is happening. I can tell something bizarre is happening. I still have control over the situation, whatever that means for me. I'm going to approach it like it's just a misunderstanding at the bank. until they beat me in the head with a club or until they break my leg, and now suddenly I'm tied up half naked in my own living room. It really frustrates me when characters do this because it's realistic. It's what I do. I was approached homeless people in LA. This is a reality. If you live out there and you're not in Los Angeles, big spoiler alert, if you ever come here, there are homeless people. And they're not polite homeless people. I don't know where you are, where you have polite homeless people, but here, they'll be polite until the moment you've demonstrated you're not giving them anything. And then they feel that they can just descend on you as you're walking away, as you're just trying to live your life. So it really frustrates me because I want to believe I'm the kind of person who would not accept violent, albeit safe-seeming situation. If somebody is in my house that I don't want in my house, I like to believe I'm the kind of person who would act irrationally to get them out.
Yeah,
and I don't know if I am. It's a fear.
I think the self-cannibalism makes it not too irrational. I've met some weird people. None of them were currently eating themselves.
That's true.
So
That's true.
I think that
he comes off as violent right away.
A little bit stressing. Though I will say that performance, giving him a thumbs
Chop
up
tops?
there. Yeah,
Oh, big time.
If this is a black comedy, he is the one that was aware of it.
Okay, so yeah, the black comedy in it. It is the emphasis is on the black and less on the comedy. Big time. The comedy almost. Excuse me. The comedy comes almost as an afterthought from the audience's perspective.
Right.
Something horrific happened, then your mind realizes the absurdity as it fit, and then you're like, oh, that was kind of funny.
Right.
LG is the producer, and he's been established as a character who may or may not be attracted to Stretch, but he's definitely hawking loogies. That's his thing. He hawks loogies indoors, usually to punctuate awkward moments, and the first instance of black comedy that I can point to is when I'm getting ahead of myself again, but anyway, he's dying. He's getting his head beaten in with a hammer.
The filmmakers got ahead of themselves, so you can.
And he spits as he's getting beaten in the head with a hammer. So that's like kind of funny that I'm he's still hawking loogies even as he's dying. So anyway, like I said, getting ahead of myself. Stretch gives Chop Top a tour. The tour ends with a fantastic scare. Leatherface, a light being turned on, and Leatherface being at the end of a hall, running toward the camera, full chainsaw revving.
Right.
Great scare. He accidentally chainsaws Chop Top's head, which reveals why he's called Chop Top. He's got a chrome dome up on there. And that's when we get our big chase. Right. Leatherface is chasing Stretch through the radio station. Eventually, she holds herself up in the radio vault that's got a big, giant, freezer door. That's when LG returns, sees that a truck is there. This doesn't look right. Bashed in the head with a hammer, and he's getting beat. Yeah. Stretch has holed herself up inside the radio vault, and she keeps saying, they live on fear. They live on fear. They live on fear. They live on fear. Because that's something Lefty said, is that they live on fear, and honey, I don't have any fear left in my heart. And it's something he holds on to later, is that, Lord, show me I have no fear so that they can't do anything to me. It's a weird thing, because they're people. They're not magic. There's no they live on fear thing. It's a metaphor for just insane fear. I don't know.
That's your Justice League crossover right there.
Did it strike you as weird?
Yeah, of course it did.
So then there's this amazing moment, and I say amazing with a mountain of salt because this is an examination of Leatherface's sexuality. We mentioned in the first segment about how horrific it is to bring it back to the childhood fears, and one of those fears being a lack of understanding of your body and its changes and things, and how that can incite fear. It's a body horror element when you think about it. So when Leatherface doesn't break through the main freezer door, instead he breaks through the wall in a second really good scare. She ends up on the end of a bathtub filled with ice and beers, a typical thing you keep in the radio vault, and Leatherface uses his enormously long chainsaw to, for all intents and purposes, have sex with her. He uses his chainsaw as an extension of his manhood and thrusts in the ice over and over again. Now, This would be subtle enough and effective in explaining of what the heck Leatherface is doing right now. But it goes further. Stretch starts to say, how good are you? How good are you? And then Leatherface he turns off the chainsaw and starts rubbing it up her thigh. Now this too could be enough. Could be enough for me to understand what is trying to be put forth. But he manages to get the chainsaw all the way up to her vagina. It's pressing against her jeans, and she's saying, "You're so good. You're the best." And Leatherface is standing there licking his lips, and then it finally moves on, because what happens is it's literally like, uh-oh, he's gonna come, because he's like, I'm gonna rev the chainsaw and then he's gonna kill her, and that's what's gonna be it. And he's frustrated with the whole situation, so he goes a little nuts right there, and it blows my mind, this scene. I feel like we could do a whole podcast on just that scene of what the heck is going on, of Leatherface being alone with a woman that he has a crush on, essentially, being a damaged child himself with nothing to connect himself to but this extension, this chainsaw, which he has used to only kill. And suddenly it becomes a passionate extension of himself. Is this dark comedy?
It's really sexy, isn't it?
It's really sexy.
I'm just so aroused when I was watching it. Oh, God. I
don't know. Did you have thoughts on that scene?
I mean...
Did you want to just not touch it?
I mean, you can't not touch someone chainsawing an ice bucket full of beers while a woman spreads her legs on top of it. I don't know that I could say what was the intent of this. Certainly the sexuality that as you portrayed it is on board.
I'm going to do a thing I haven't done before, and I feel bad. On this podcast, I've established that I'm a gay man, and I haven't established yet. How do you identify?
Oh, I'm a straight man.
Okay, so this scene, and a lot of scenes like it in horror movies, I do not respond to in the way that the filmmakers wanted me to. There isn't even a twinge of interest in the idea of what's going on, and it's something that I identify as. I'm sure there are other people who identify as gay who might still feel an inkling of what the filmmakers wanted. I'm curious, how did you react to it? Is this your first time seeing the movie, by the way?
No, I had seen it before, but it must have been a decade since I'd seen it last. Yeah, the arousal comment was certainly a joke. Not turned on by that scene, but yeah, I mean, absolutely is that meant to be a representation of his uncomfortability with his own sexuality in his infantile brain and being unable to establish it, and I assume that it is meant that this chainsawing people is some sort of sexual release for Leatherface. Intellectually, I guess I think I can connect maybe with what the filmmakers were trying to do.
And what is that?
Which I think just to establish that killing is his replaced his sexuality.
You don't think that's giving the writers a lot of credit, instead of saying, oh, they just wanted to make a sexy, scary scene?
Yeah.
Because making sex scary is cool.
I mean, yeah, I know.
I like your interpretation more.
Because, well, making sex scary is kind of cool sometimes if you play it well, because we're all nervous about sex, and
David Cronenberg certainly knows how to do it.
And we're nervous about being intimate with other people, and laying yourself bare. And
Basic Instinct. Kind of right. Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. Under the Skin.
Right. I think what's clear is the filmmaker was absolutely trying to give a Frankenstein feeling to Leatherface, and that he's not really the villain. It's these people that made him this way.
Yes. Because he does not kill her in that scene.
Right.
He lies to his brother when he asks, did you get her? And he goes, yeah.
Right.
Because he didn't ask, did he kill her? He said, get her. Like, sure.
Yeah.
I got her.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my interpretation of it, and then obviously we'll get into how he hides her, which is the most fun part.
So Chop Top and Leatherface take the presumably dead LG away. They put him they beat him to death, presumably, with a hammer. They put him in the truck, and they both drive away. Yeah, Stretch follows them. Stretch gets in her car. Does she get in a car, or does she run after them? Anyway, she follows the Sawyers. I'm going to refer to them now.
Right,
It's
yeah.
we learn that Leatherface's name, at least affectionately, he's referred to as Bubba.
Right.
And Chop Top is Chop Top, though I don't know if they actually say his name. It was just in the subtitles a lot. Anyway, the Sawyers are driving away, and Stretch, either on foot or on car, follows them and gets to their lair, which is an elephant graveyard. I don't know, how else would you describe this place? It's got like the if you've seen that one OK Go music video where they're in a car and they're driving around things, it's got those domes for miles where she's running through them, and then she gets chased by a car that's clearly not the Sawyers, and she's scared. And this is one of 2 times that Lucky is there, and it's not actually the Sawyers, it's Lucky. And she very rationally says, "Where were you?" And that's when Lefty. That's when Lefty reveals, "I had to do it. I had to use you. I'm sorry, darling." Then she falls down a hole deep into the belly of the beast.
Right.
And Lefty goes back to his car, arms his chainsaws, says a little prayer, and he goes into the belly too.
Right. And that part's actually the interestingest part for me as a structuralist is this is the most classically structured part of the entire story. Is
How do you mean?
This is their home is a labyrinth, right? And Lefty's going in to essentially fight the Minotaur in the middle of a labyrinth, the Minotaur being Leatherface. You usually don't see Theseus with a chainsaw.
Or 2.
Or 3, I think.
Dual wielding,
Right?
yeah.
The 2 little ones. And I think also, I don't want to get too ahead, but is my comments on the end of the movie, which maybe I shouldn't start, because classically I'll say that Theseus, when he kills the Minotaur, is the midpoint of the story. He has to follow the rope back out of the labyrinth, in which he returns with the elixir, if you will, or seizing the sword is a lot of ways we use it as in writing for that plot point. However, I don't want to get too ahead, but we'll save it.
Yeah. So what happens? He arms himself. He says his little prayer. He goes inside, and that's when we see Leatherface in his own lair, where he's brought LG, and Stretch is now hiding. Stretch is hiding behind a barrel, and we see a long scene of what Leatherface does, what his MO is. And what he does is childish. He kind of just flays random parts of his bodies, ending with the face and just hanging them on meat hooks. No one's asking him to do this. No one's really checking on him, really. They're just leaving him to his own devices. This is what Leatherface does for fun. So after a point, Stretch can't take it anymore. She utters a noise, or she knocks something over, that's it, on accident, and it alerts Leatherface over to her, who doesn't kill her once again, this time because she says, "No good."
Right, that's where, yeah.
Now you're no good. Before I was saying, "Are you good? You're the best." You are no good. She's treating him like a child, and it works.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a probably too good respect analysis of this, which I want to drop back to the chainsaw scene, the greatest scene in history of cinema. Because he goes outside with that log, and I think that's what you're referring to, with the guy really liking him using the chainsaw. But he doesn't seem like he's ever used a chainsaw before, and is like randomly obliterating a log. And I'm gonna go ahead and give him like unfair credit and say that was setting up this protagonist to be a foil for his enemy, who's chopping randomly at bodies. I don't think that's probably the case, but I'm gonna go ahead and give him that extra credit.
That does, when you say it in that light, it kind of explains why he was doing that. He was doing it, you got to get in the mind of the killer to understand them.
There you go.
Yeah, is that, well, if that's what he's doing, I got to understand what's so great about it. Clearly, he sees something great here. And so that's what he does. He's chopping at that log, not like a lumberjack would do it, but like how he imagines the crazy killer would.
Right.
So Lefty goes into the pit, and Stretch is given LG's face to wear. Leatherface goes and gets LG's face, comes back to Stretch, and puts it on her. And then he puts LG's hat on her, and then he dances with her.
Yes.
Is this black comedy?
Yeah, I took it as I was going back and forth between what was going on. It might be both things. Was to pretend that she's already dead to protect her from the rest of the family, but also to make her like him, look like him by having a face as a mask too, like he is.
I didn't think about that at all.
And that's where my Bride of Frankenstein idea, or I think it was an homage too. So I was a little, but I do have to give her credit because I'm pretty confident if someone put someone else's skin face on top of mine, I would not be able to hold my lunch. And she really keeps it together.
She looks like she's on the verge of just an absolute nervous breakdown when he's dancing with her. The groans she's uttering, they're not screams. They're just these, just like groans.
Right.
Yeah. No, credit where credit is due. Let's find her name.
Oh, and she does put the face back onto, JB's the character's name, right? Or LG, sorry. He puts his face back on her.
Caroline Williams plays Vanita Stretch Brock, and she does a great job in this movie.
Yes.
So after Leatherface dances with her and leaves, LG gets up.
Yeah.
First, Leatherface ties Stretch's hands behind her back so that she can't take his face off of herself, and LG, who I wished was dead at this point, gets up, and he's not in abject visceral pain. He's just kind of bewildered.
Right.
He's shocked, I guess. He's in shock is the idea, because he gets just enough energy to untie her. And there's a weird moment where he picks up the knife and it's like, is he going to stab her on accident because of how weak he is? And then he just cuts the rope.
Right.
And then he dies from exhaustion, or from his wounds, rather. So it's hard to even call that one a Leatherface kill, because he kind of dies from his wounds after the fact.
Right. He did stab him earlier with the chainsaw there, but really, it was like this love. The part that got me was the loving act of putting his face back on him.
There's a long, tearful goodbye in that way.
That was you don't have to put my dead, ripped off face back on. That does not.
Please.
Oh, speaking of which, now I mentioned, but I think during the break, the Bill Moseley and Devil's Rejects and all that. So that's got to be the second thing they took from Devil's Rejects is the face on top of her.
Oh, yeah.
All right. That's definitely not something I want to have happen to me. But yeah, the weirdly loving scene.
The long goodbye. I feel like
goodbye.
modern movies don't do this. Thor Ragnarok just came out a couple weeks ago, and I won't spoil exactly what happens, but a major character perishes, and the movie does not give a single second to the other characters reacting to their death before another thing approaches.
Right.
And it's a thing that this movie didn't have to do, frankly, and it did, and it made the death of LG mean suddenly much more to me as the audience than I ever cared about him before.
Yeah, and I'll actually say structurally that is a thing the movie should have to do.
Yes.
That they just don't anymore.
Because it feels like a waste of time.
Yeah, we usually call that moment, depending on what structure you use, it's the all is lost moment.
Yeah.
It's usually some death near the end of the second act that leads to the dark
loss of
night.
hope.
Yeah, exactly. And your character protagonist having that reflection of what she's going to do, the helplessness, that fear,
Giving up, temptation.
Yeah, and I think if you lose that, in the Star Wars movies are always really good at that. Obi-Wan Kenobi dies at that point in the first one. The new remake, that's spoiler alert, Han Solo dies at the same point for the same effect. But yeah, I think that actually is a good structure, and more movies should use that.
I agree. So we get a couple of shots here and there of Lefty running through the compound, far away enough from everyone else that no one knows that he's actively chopping down the support structures to this mine, I guess it is. It's a mine where all these load-bearing wood chunks are, and Lefty's just going through chopping them down, screaming all hell. This is something Dennis Hopper actually talked about in an interview, that he hates his character in this movie because he has agency in the first act and then goes mad for the third one and does nothing until basically his end. But what's interesting is that as he's going around, he comes across a body that may or may not be familiar to people who saw the 1974 original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it is the handicapped brother, Franklin. And Lefty even says, Franklin, they can't do this to you. Yeah, so that was kind of cool to tie it back to the original and kind of like almost far too late remind us of Lefty's tie to this story and why he really wants to do this and why he went out and bought 2 chainsaws instead of using the gun I assume he owns because he's a police officer.
Or he could have picked up at the gun shop at the liquor store.
Or that. I'm sure they sold guns at the chainsaw store next to the liquor.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's going through.
You gotta fight fire with chainsaws.
Okay, so let's get to the very end. Stretch is being is bonked on the head and tied up, and she's at a dinner table. This is the quintessential Texas Chainsaw Massacre scene that has to be in every single entry. A scene where a person is there under duress, surrounded by the grossest things you can imagine. What can you imagine?
Oh, that's where Matthew McConaughey shines in the next one, right? That equivalent scene. Yeah, grossest thing I can imagine. That, I mean...
Because I could tell you what shows up. It's chairs and chandeliers and lamps. Basically all the stuff from the Ed Gein profile.
Right.
This is the Ed Gein scene. No one seems to make them. No one seems to be interested in making them. It's been hard established that the Sawyers are all about making chili and making money that way.
Which is wild because they put a lot of effort into building this whole underground compound.
This had to have taken years. And there's just the 3 of them and a 103-year-old man that they actively care for?
Very impressive to put this whole thing together, yeah.
So, yeah, at the dinner table, we meet Grandpa Sawyer. He gets wheeled in, and we get this great little exchange that it kind of explains their origin. Grandpa Sawyer used to work at the Arlen Rendering Company, and one day they started bringing in automation. Bum, bum, bum. The big bad guy that everyone hates is automation, taking our jobs. They brought in air-powered hammer killing machines and automatic meat rendering devices. And Grandpa couldn't take it, so he came home and taught his family the old ways because he was just a guy who enjoyed killing animals with his bare hands. Somehow this translated into cannibalism, which he doesn't explain. I don't know. It's one of those weird moments in movies where it's like, here's a bunch of exposition for no run's purpose or anything.
Right.
It's a villain monologuing.
Yeah.
He kind of gets a little bit into how it's never politicians who have to pay taxes. Movie stars don't pay taxes. It's always the small businessman who's always getting kicked in the butt. And it kind of turns into, for 2 seconds at least, a class thing.
Right.
Where he's been put in this situation, and he feels like he's been forced to do this.
Yeah. I don't know if this is social commentary
That's what I'm saying,
at this point, or
is it black comedy?
I think the filmmaker would like you to believe it's black comedy. Not quite sure what the joke is. There's a hint of satire.
All right, so Grandpa Sawyer, it's revealed, is the guy who lands the final blow. Since he was so good at beating animals' skulls in before, they give him a hammer, and over again, he drops it. And it's a scene that I would put in the black comedy column, but it really got to me that Stretch is screaming her head off the entire time in that scene as Leatherface is told to get her from that end of the table to this end of the table. And the act of doing that looks just absolutely terrifying on Stretch's face as she's put over this basin as this 103-year-old man is failing to use this hammer, and it's just so terrifying because he's getting closer and better, and you see this moment of prescience in his eyes as he realizes, there's the head, and he lands one blow on her, and that's all he can do, and she's kind of knocked out. But God, that scene really got me. Just the trial and error and them just going, come on, Grandpa, come on, you can do it, come on. It's a family thing.
It's a really family film, good for the holidays.
So Lefty shows up. Hooray, he's finally there. And Stretch kind of peeks around the corner, and that's when Lefty loses it and gets in a chainsaw fight with Leatherface. And they're literally using them. Like when I say the word chainsaw fight, you think And that's what happens.
It's their chainsaw.
They're
fight.
literally using them like kids use swords, like left, then right, left, right. I'm gonna go down now. Ready? Down.
Yeah, it reminds me of playing with like the wooden swords from medieval times as a kid. Yeah.
So he heroes up, he frees Stretch from her things, and she goes and runs off. He manages to chainsaw Drayton the cook's back and balls, kind of, and Drayton hides under the table while Leatherface... Okay, there's a lot of characters here. Drayton, the cook, is under the table. Stretch is running away. Chop Top is chasing Stretch. Lucky is fighting Leatherface on top of the table. Grandpa has picked up the knife and is now standing. Stretch is getting further away from Chop Top. She manages to break a lamp and quasi-electrocute him, shock him really, because then he gets up. We cut back to chainsaw fight, and old Grandpa throws the hammer, misses Lefty, bonks Leatherface right in the head, which makes him lose just enough focus for Lefty to get a chainsaw in the gut.
Right.
But that still doesn't kill him. Leatherface has a chainsaw sticking out of his gut. Lefty pulls out 2 more chainsaws and starts fighting Leatherface some more. Meanwhile, underneath the table, Drayton Sawyer, the cook, has a grenade. He pulls down Nubbins, who I believe was a character in the first Texas Chainsaw. It's a corpse now. He pulls down Nubbins Sawyer and pulls out from his lapel or his jacket or whatever a grenade and pulls the pin and just kind of holds on to it until Leatherface falls over, drops his chainsaw through the table, which saws the back of Drayton, the cook. He drops the grenade, and as we see Chop Top chasing Stretch, big explosion behind them.
Right.
That's the last we see of Leatherface, of Lefty, of Grandpa, of Drayton, the dad. Who knows what happens to them? Because the rest of the movie, the last part of it, is Stretch getting chased by Chop Top, higher and higher and higher. Turns out it got to be daytime at some point while they were down there, because once they get outside, the sun is up.
And the carnival's an Aztec pyramid when you get to the top.
And the carnival, is a spiral staircase. Or no, it's like a weird, like, Tim Burton super steep staircase until she eventually gets enough distance between herself and Chop Top that she meets Great Grandma, who's sitting at the highest point of the tallest tower and still holding on to that chainsaw. Who is she?
Grandma Sawyer, right. So, well, first off, I think...
What is this supposed to be?
I mean, to me, it was a little bit of an ode to Psycho. You know, it's the same story with Ed Gein. You got the mom that's dead that you can't really accept.
Okay, yeah, keep going, sorry.
Yeah, so that was my take on that. And especially with
Chop Top's reaction to her.
Exactly, Chop Top's reaction, like thinking she's still alive, all that kind of stuff is how I took that. The other part of that scene I took, which is interesting because this film has 2 protagonists.
Yes, another unusual thing.
Right, and you're switching kind of back and forth. And, you know, like I mentioned, he's kind of doing this Theseus story of going to kill the Minotaur, who's Leatherface, and he uses a chainsaw. And normally that's the midpoint of the story where you would afterwards return with elixir or...
escape.
Or collect the sword. We often talked about it. You get a reward through going through your ordeal of your innermost horror, right? His innermost cave was the descent into this place, which we didn't pass. I did skip over the fact that there, I believe, were dinosaur bones in the background when he was going down there.
There were? Did I miss that?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident.
I don't think I saw that.
There was
Wow.
pterodactyl bones that when he was chopping through skeletons to get down there. Just noticed that in the background, had to pause it and make sure, and yep, there's dinosaurs. I don't know how deep this thing is, but whatever.
That seems to imply pretty dang deep.
It seems like it would be.
Pretty literally labyrinthian.
Yes, and so, but within that, though, I'd say the seizing the sword moment, since our other protagonist was killed during his ordeal, seems to be her seizing the chainsaw.
Mm-hmm. Ripping it from the stone.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Arthur taking the sword from the stone. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Same concept. It feels a little truncated
Extremely. This is the last minute of the movie this is happening.
Right. It's the last minute of the movie where normally this would be the midpoint of the film
Yeah.
in a traditional structure, which is kind of funny.
Or maybe the climax with some falling action, but
Yeah, but it's really it makes the movie feel unended when it gets there.
It
Yeah.
feels unended, even though we did tie everything up.
Right.
And I remember, so the last thing that happens is she finds Great Grandma. Great Grandma is holding a chainsaw. I call her Stitch. Stretch rips the chainsaw from Great Grandma, and Chop Top sees this and thinks that ripping the chainsaw out is what killed Great Grandma. So now Chop Top snaps,
Right.
and he comes at her, and
He hasn't snapped already, but yeah.
yeah. I mean, this is where he stops being kind of goofy
Yeah.
in any way and just is like blood rage. And he starts slashing at her back. And that's another really intense scene where that could take a long time to die from that.
Right.
But he's willing to do it because she's willing to stay there and rev the chainsaw. It finally gets going because someone's been filling gas into this chainsaw at the top of this tower. And she kind of pokes him a little bit and he falls.
Right.
And we get this great shot of Stretch's complete transformation. She has the chainsaw now. She's the one in power, and she does her little dance and spins around. And that's the end.
Right, she's the metaphorical rebirth of the dead Lefty.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe the dead Leatherface. Maybe she snapped.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't take that into consideration. So yeah, I mean,
So maybe she lost her mind.
that's interesting. You know, if my memory serves me right, that last shot of her chainsawing him and him falling off their weird Aztec pyramid was a reflection of the end of the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre of what happens to Leatherface. Am I wrong? It's been a while since I've
Well,
seen
in the
that
original
movie.
Leatherface, the last shot of it is him standing in the middle of the highway while the girl gets away in the back of the truck. She's screaming her head off, watching Leatherface
okay.
just kind of do the, if you want to look up the best portrayal of Leatherface, it's the last 10 seconds of the original film when the guy is just swinging the chainsaw around like an absolute maniac.
And Leatherface wasn't in the first one that much.
No, he's not.
Right, yeah.
And in fact, he's portrayed much more damaged. The movie portrays him in the original as being afraid of all these people in his house.
Right.
And that's it, essentially. He's an animal in a cage that's been invaded by the zookeepers.
Right. Yeah, I think I had more sympathy for Leatherface in the original, actually.
No, the original's better. I'm not disagreeing. This one, so yeah, that's the movie of Leatherface. And so briefly, I want to talk about some of the black comedy moments,
right.
quote unquote, that Tobe Hooper. So in interviews, Tobe Hooper explains that he thought it was obvious that there were black comedy elements in the original, but people didn't react to them. So his goal was to make them more obvious and more numerous in this one. It really suffered for that. Fans and critics alike panned the dark comedy. Scenes like LG spitting, even when dying, and when he's revived and he has no face, he spits again. That's a moment of black comedy. When Leatherface and Stretch dance while she's wearing LG's face. The idea of the Sawyers raging against taxes and automation and being the little guy and those things. Oh, Stretch mistaking that Lefty is one of the people chasing her 2 separate times and running from them. The skeletons that are like posed in funny positions where it's like a beach tableau and they're like drinking cocktails, or the one where it's like he's made to look like a cowboy riding a bomb, like the Dr. Strangelove image. Who sets these up? Grandpa's multiple misses with the hammer. Dennis Lefty showing up, confronting Drayton the cook. Lefty saying, "I'm the cook, Drayton, saying, 'Who sent you? Was it those burrito boys? Was it the new taco truck or something?' And he says, 'I'm the Lord of the Harvest.' And Drayton says, 'What is that, some new health joint?' Like, this is supposed to be the climax, and they're making jokes like that.
Yep.
The exit sign at the end, which is
exit
supposed to be
sign,
like, what is that? Is that poetic? Like, circular structure? Because she mentions there's going to be a tour and it's going to end with an exit sign? Why do they have working electricity? Ugh.
Yeah, it did remind me of like a haunted house you go to as a 10-year-old.
Yeah, with the skeletons just posed and things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, black comedy in this. there's a theme of sexuality and sexual tension throughout the movie, mostly between Stretch and Leatherface, but there's also between Stretch and LG. And I don't know if there's any others. If they are, I feel like they're all geared towards Stretch, as she's the only female in this movie with anything to do. That said, she does have a lot to do. She's the one that takes it upon herself not to play the thing, but to chase her captors.
Right.
They left. She was safe, but she chased after them.
That's true, and well, to give credit where credit's due, that's probably one of the first instances of a female horror victim fighting back instead of being the just the pathetic princess character.
Does Jamie Lee Curtis fight back in any way in Halloween?
I'm trying to.
Or is she a victim the whole time?
She does fight back at the end, but only after meeting. I'm using the actor's name
Loomis.
now, but Dr. Loomis. I was gonna say Donald Pleasance, but. She did fight back a little bit, I suppose. That was a good character, though. I love Halloween.
Well, I mean, the sexual tension moments are obviously where Leatherface is using the chainsaw as his own penis, where he's where he's putting the face on her, Stretch and dancing with her, where he kisses her at the dinner table instead of carrying her over to her death.
Right.
Just a lot of moments that ultimately humanize the monster in this movie, which is Leatherface. In an effort to, I imagine, villainize his family? It doesn't seem to do either for me, though.
Yeah, I think it is to villainize the family. I think that you see that more in the first one.
Yeah. Where they're, like, abusing him and telling him, like, you're dumb, calling him a retard.
Exactly.
He's kind of an equal in this one.
Yeah, I think he really is just a manipulated thing. So it's harder. Yeah, I think that was the obstacle, or not the obstacle, but the goal was to shift blame from him to give the audience sympathy for the killer. Doesn't quite work as well as it does for Norman Bates, but...
Well, I mean, the first kill in this movie is essentially like a warranted death. These teens are raucous, they shoot guns at signs, they play chicken with strangers and with Leatherface, and the argument is made like, well, they had it coming. They were being dicks all around town, across counties, and Leatherface got them.
Right.
So it's weird to set that up, that the first murder is like not a serial killer kind of murder. It's a revenge murder.
Right, because the way a lot
what
of
are they doing?
These early horror films, or not early, but early modern horror films came to be was, it was tied to this time where everyone was trying, like you couldn't make gangster movies unless the gangster died at the end in order to have a meaning. And you had these... these horror movies in which the kids that take drugs and the kids that have sex and all like that
have to die,
and that those are like the rules, like they make fun of them in Scream and stuff,
or in Cabin
like
in the Woods,
or Cabin in the Woods, or any of that kind of stuff. And so I think that was a big part of it. It was establishing that, but then to go away from that entirely, because there's no reason Stretch should die.
And there's no payoff for their quasi-relationship, quote-unquote.
Right. Though I don't know how one would pay that.
Well, the way I imagine is that she would use the relationship to survive somehow. That because she has a relationship, that somehow breaks through Leatherface's insanity enough so that... I guess that does happen, because he never kills her.
Right. I guess it's similar to Frankenstein, and it's a little similar to King Kong, too. As far as like the classic monster movie
of how he has a heart of gold,
right? Not much of a heart of gold, I suppose, but at least a soft spot.
I mean, it's funny you bring up Frankenstein's monster, because I would liken Leatherface to the kind of thing that you could put a bunny in his hands and he probably wouldn't kill it immediately,
right?
But there would absolutely 100% be a point where he does not understand that he killed this thing.
And Frankenstein's monster, if you go back to the novel version and not the movie.
I actually read that recently.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So, as you
it's
know...
way more intellectual and heady than I remember.
Right, because he can talk and he's intelligent. And he's
philosophical.
He's philosophical. And, that what drives people away is his appearance by having dead skin over his face.
Yeah.
So that would be the tie I'd see. The Leatherface is this guy that literally has a dead person's skin over his face, which is why he's repulsive to everyone.
I'm kind of interested to... Sorry.
No, continue.
I'm kind of interested to see the prequel, Leatherface, to see how any studio tries to explain how a child became this person, because from what I understand, that's a pretty boring movie. It seems like a child who lived through constant abuse his entire life and is now an adult and experiencing constant abuse from his family.
Yeah, that's hard to make too much fun.
Well, I mean, there's the movie coming out that's based on a graphic novel called My Friend Dahmer. That's an examination of a person who went to high school with Jeffrey Dahmer and observed who he was as a person. Is there value in, I don't want to say fetishizing, but glorifying the criminally insane?
That's interesting. Because obviously that's something we have to deal with more and more now, right, in real life. More on these mass murder kind of things. I think it's I think we just do it. Maybe we handle it the wrong way now. Because I think there is, you look at a book like In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, right? That I think we all have a desire to find out what makes people do these kind of things. But when you're doing an in-depth look into these two killers, like in something like In Cold Blood, one, you have to be the type of person that will read a whole book to gather what his point is. And it doesn't glorify him. It's more of a psychological study. That being said, it's fun, I guess, on our darker base nature to watch these characters.
It is, isn't it?
And I'm certainly fascinated by these serial killers.
But is it pulp, or is there actual value to understand, like the new show on Netflix, the Mindhunter show, where it's essentially the TV show of understanding serial killers' minds?
Right.
And so, yes, I would argue there's value from a police perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, to understanding the mind of a serial killer. But what value other than pulp and entertainment? I don't know what point I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to...
No, I see what you're saying, because, you especially if you have, both in movies and in real life, you have copycat people. You have people
exactly,
that, you make heroes of them, and then people know their name's going to be on TV, and then you get the next one, and the next one. I guess it's how you...
Or is this blaming video games for violence again?
I don't think it is. I mean, to a degree it is. I don't blame... what was the killing spree on Natural Born Killers for causing a killing spree necessarily.
What if it was the inverse? What if someone had made a game of the Boston Massacre?
Right.
Then suddenly it's obvious.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because it is something that I think the human mind, we want
Boston
to
Marathon. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I got
what you're talking about.
But I got Texas Chainsaw on the mind. Sorry,
right.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, I think we want to analyze and we want to make sense of these things because they're so... I mean, that's what I mentioned way earlier was that cosmic indifference, right? I mean, we see that in real life. What's... this Vegas shooting, right? Or I know it's not the most recent one now, but that's still one that we have no idea why he did it, right? And there is this kind of... what's like
a nagging sense of
it's
wanting
like
to
a
know.
Relief when you find out what can cause such
it was because of his wife. It was because he hates blank.
Right. Or like in Orlando, at least you could say okay, this dude was a closeted homosexual that didn't know how to deal with it maybe and snapped or something that we can at least formulate, because I think we don't want to think that we could just snap. Maybe part of it is we want to have a reason to look at.
It's movies like The Purge that capitalize on that idea.
Right.
All it would take is the opportunity, and
right,
you could be
which I don't really buy into. I don't think if there was everything was legal tomorrow, either of us would go out and rape and murder and steal.
But the implication is that maybe your neighbor would.
Right. So you get paranoid and you go against everybody else. Yeah, I mean,
so yes, it will make movies, but if it inspires even one Ed Gein copycat killer, what's the...
It's a good question. I don't know that it... Because it doesn't seem to me like I'd have to see some sort of scientific breakdown that says watching horror movies leads to horror. Because it seems to me like the video game thing.
Yeah.
I believe there's been studies that people that actually play violent video games tend to have less violence, or tend to be less violent in the real world.
Unless they're predisposed, unless they come from violence. If they're in an abusive household and end up playing Grand Theft Auto, that's not a good mixture.
And so my thought is, I mean, you look at the horror film, and the first thing you want to analyze in a horror film is, why do I like this? Right? We don't like being scared in real life.
We don't like seeing guts.
We don't like seeing guts and blood and stuff, but we like seeing these movies. And I think part of that is because in the subconscious, you're in a theater, and you're comfortable, and you're safe. And so you can have these feelings and these experiences. I think it's the same thing with how we get fascinated by these killers. Is it's safe. We're not diving into our own subconscious and finding the darkest recesses of our own minds by looking to these others.
I think the fascination is a great point. From my experience, I was terrified of Chucky, like I mentioned. I had a deep-rooted fear, not of any of the scenes in any movie, because I hadn't seen a single one. I was a child, and I was afraid of what Chucky looked like.
Right.
It was his design, the cracks, the absolute chaotic damage that his face was, incited instant and all-encompassing fear in me.
Right.
And I had a sister who had dolls, and that became really difficult for me. What broke that was the the event horizon of me being fascinated enough, wanting to learn about Chucky and what the heck he is. And so it started with Wikipedia articles, simply reading the synopses for these movies that I was too terrified to see. It happened again when Freddy vs. Jason started coming out. I was terrified of those posters and things, but I stared at them from far away. I remember specifically being in an emergency room because my mom had to go there, and there was an ad for Freddy vs. Jason on a newspaper, and I stared at that thing from across the waiting room, and that was my way of being okay and understanding it, because I was fascinated. I was scared, but I was also fascinated.
Right.
There's both to it.
Yeah, I think we want to face our fears in a way. For me, it wasn't the dolls as a kid. It was my brother had this ripped up old Grim Reaper mask with holes in it, and it was plastic, and it just got me. He'd run around with it, and like I would think it wasn't my brother, like anymore. This monster chasing me, and little clips of movies and images like you mentioned with Chucky, or like I saw images of the
commercials.
The Birds. I saw 5 seconds of the Birds, and every time Nickelodeon ended and Nick at Night came on, the first show is Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which is a show I love. When I was a child, I'd see this chubby guy's silhouette come on screen, which is a completely unterrifying image, but knowing that it related to the Birds scared the living crap out of me, and I'd run from the room screaming just seeing that black and white shadow. So I think, as you get older, especially why, horror films are so often targeted towards the adolescents, is you get to that point and you want to start facing your fears, because that kind of is what makes you an adult. It's almost like these movies, I think, are part of growing up when you can really, especially a film like this, it is a horror comedy or whatnot, you can look at that, and if you were really scared about masked people chasing you around and you see this movie, you're like, oh no, I can that's not real. I don't need to be scared of everybody around me. This is pretend.
Well, not to get neuroscientific on this podcast, but I have learned that dopamine and fear are intrinsically related, that when a person experiences fear and terror, their brain releases a chemical called dopamine that is essentially supposed to soothe the body to enough of a degree that adrenaline, if it's not needed anymore, can rescind, and dopamine can take over and calm the body. So there is an understanding of people wanting to seek out the feelings that they get from dopamine, from that same idea that chocolate, I guess, gives you.
Right. I mean, adrenaline, too, if it's more of an action thriller.
People like that.
Right. I mean, our body creates all sorts of drugs to make us high and all sorts of weirds, and, movies that are effective can draw them out.
So what themes did you want to notice? I feel like I've been taking over the analysis section here. Was there anything you noticed in the movie? Overarching things or undercurrents?
I'm trying to think. Well, usually you have a character state the theme in the first 5 to 10 minutes. I'm trying to think. I feel like it did happen in this one. Having trouble.
This is my chance to stop playing headbanger music and do something real?
Yeah, I think that might be it. I think that's probably it.
Is that being low status but still getting to do something?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, yeah, that's probably about it.
Now, does it achieve this?
No. I wouldn't say it. Certainly, this character, in a way, does transform. She starts coming after her baddies instead of running from her problems. That's not good advice in this case. You should have called the police.
But it's heroic.
Just police that weren't Dennis Hopper. I'm sorry, that lefty.
Or Dennis Hopper. Don't call him.
Don't call Dennis Hopper if you need a chainsaw.
Is he still alive? Did he die recently? I think he died recently.
Not. That's too bad.
James Caan's still alive. Dennis Hopper's not, I don't think.
Oh, that's too bad.
Sorry,
Dennis Hopper. But yeah. It's a weird Dennis Hopper role, too, because you got this guy in Dennis Hopper that's playing this like he's an Easy Rider, and it's not Easy Rider.
He's so high-strung.
It's so, the drugged out. I don't know if his character's meant to be drugged out.
He's supposed to be, alcoholed out. In his hotel, you can see he's finishing a bottle of whiskey.
Right.
But that's the only inkling we get that he's...
Yeah, his emotional
like an obsessed detective.
Instability is so crazy that it's hard to. I think they really did take a lot of classic horror tropes and almost smashed them together. And some fit probably a little better than others did. I think they probably tried to fit a couple square pegs into some circular holes, but. Is there any big transcendent theme I can think of? I
don't mean to put you on the spot. You don't have to dig one up if you can't think of one.
Overall, I think, it's, the family thing with the villains. I guess the fear of leaving the nest is kind of tied to Leatherface a bit. But yeah, beyond that, I think you nailed it pretty good thematically.
Well, thanks. All right, in that case, this is the part of the show where we talk about our ratings, what we thought. Oh, wait! I forgot. Actually, usually what we like to do is we go on Twitter, social media, and we turn to our Twitter followers to see if they tweeted any questions or suggestions or ideas. And it looks like for the first time ever, we have one. Somebody has tweeted at the Gory Days to let us know what they thought or what they wanted mentioned on the podcast. So, let's see. Why even bother? At Gemini2189 asks, so the VA pays for the family torture van? That's a really good point. Off screen, when LG is being chopped up by Leatherface, off screen, Chop Top is having a conversation with Drotten. And what he's explaining is that you wouldn't have this operation if it weren't for me. No crazy gook with the machete, no metal plate. No metal plate, no meat wagon a go-go is his line, something like that. And I'm sorry to use inoffensive words, but I am saying a quote.
I don't mind. Oh, yeah.
So does the VA pay for their operation?
What a great point out by that audience member. Did you give a shout out to their Twitter handle?
Oh, I definitely yeah, I should again. It was Why Even Bother? He is at the Gory Days. His picture is a picture of a cat kind of looking up off to the side. So that's kind of cool.
That's cool. Yeah, it's
that's a really good point. Thank you.
I think you're right. Why bother? It's just exposition that doesn't further the plot. You're right.
But
it does add a little weird level of, is this social commentary about something maybe that we're too young to really get?
Of people taking advantage of veterans' aid?
Yeah, I'm wondering that. Or yeah, I think
Don't you have to get vetted
I
to get that?
think we got to be older to maybe know what. Maybe we
It was
had to live
Vietnam.
through Vietnam to really understand where that was going.
Because the implication is that Chop Top went to Vietnam,
Right.
got injured, came home, and is now being sent free money from the government because that's what happens. That's what happens in real life.
Right, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: First Blood.
But they're being funded, essentially, by this. And they're making extra income by selling people chili. Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry, did you want to say anything more to that question or that observation?
It did make me think of something, but now I feel like I might have lost it.
Thanks a lot to that Twitter follower. Once again, if you want your thoughts read on the Gory Days each and every week, be sure to tweet at the Gory Days and let us know anything you thought about the week's films. But this is my favorite part, the rating. We rate our films based on, frankly, whatever we want on a scale of 0 to 5 thumbs, 0 being the worst, 5 being the best. Brandon, what did you think of this movie?
So we get any sort of reaction we'd like, as in like my total enjoyment versus do I think this could have been directed by Kubrick or what's the...
It's totally up to you. The criteria is non-existent. All that matters is the 0 to 5, but you can
Gotcha.
explain it however you want.
I like the 5 thumbs method as opposed to 5 stars because we clearly have 5 thumbs here. It's a good number.
I like it because it implies they're severed.
Oh, I like it. Oh, I gotcha.
I guess it doesn't. I don't know. That's what I thought it implied.
Let's so
Yeah,
for
what'd you
someone
think?
that's worked in the independent film business for quite some time, I'm gonna go ahead and out there on the limb that most independent horror movies are absolutely terrible, and most of them you don't even see on a DVD shelf, and they don't even get that far. So on that alone, if Tobe Hooper's best case scenario is 5 stars, then that's Poltergeist, or 5 thumbs up. So I'll give him a 3.
3 thumbs.
I enjoyed this more than quite a few other horror movies, but I think we covered quite a few obvious flaws.
And who do those thumbs belong to? Traditionally, we like to say who the thumbs belong to.
Oh, dude,
Like characters.
Okay, cool. So Bill Moseley gets the first thumb.
Chop Top?
Yeah, Chop Top. He's the one that gets the tone of the whole movie. To me, he gets it. He's funny. One thing I want to mention was with the horror comedy. I think you really do need to have comedic actors to make that work. I'd say Evil Dead is a great example. I think Bruce Campbell is a really good comedic actor, and I think his cameos, even the Spider-Man movies, show that off. I think you look at Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. He is a comic actor, just straight up. People don't really realize that, but he is hilarious. I think in this case, Bill Moseley was actually, I thought, pretty funny. And beyond that, I don't think you had a lot of actual comic actors, and that could be why a lot of the comedy fell short. And at Scream, obviously, you got Jamie Kennedy and all sorts of comic actors and stuff like that. So that was what I was trying to think of.
So you gave 1 thumb to Bill Moseley, Chop Top. Who do the other
All right,
2 thumbs?
1 thumb goes to Bill Moseley. We get Dennis Hopper gets a thumbs up. Apparently, Lefty walked right out of Apocalypse Now and right into Texas.
Just drove.
Yeah, I mean, he had backup chainsaws in a holster, so that alone, that's got to get a thumbs up. And our third thumbs up has got to. Let's see. Are we gonna give it to Stretch, or is there because I do.
Caroline Williams?
Because she has to do. Oh. No. I'm giving it to the frat boys at the beginning.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, they get it.
Rick the Prick.
Rick the Prick, and I forget what his friends with the word glasses on. Those guys are great. They were beyond.
Corneli Buzz.
Corneli Buzz. Like, gosh, it's like if David Cronenberg had created those characters from Funny Games.
Cool.
All right.
Fantastic. That's a nice rating for this. What did I think of the movie? I had a lot So this wasn't the first time seeing this movie. I had seen this movie in college. I actually had a friend who actually had a vast knowledge of bad horror movies that he loved watching, and he would show them to us, and we'd watch them all together. And I remember him showing this one, and he was just cracking up at like the chainsaw sex scene in the bathtub, and just laughing at Dennis Hopper running around chopping things down. And yeah, so that was my first time seeing it. So seeing it this time through the lens of the podcast, it made me realize, like, it's a fun movie. I was surprised at how much fun it was, and I'm not saying because of the black comedy. It's just the story is tight, it's easy to follow, and Stretch is a fun character. She is not a blonde bimbo without any agency waiting for a man to save her. Yes, she's waiting for Lefty to come and save her. He doesn't, and she goes off on her own. Yes, Lefty comes to save her again at the bottom of the belly of the beast, but once he does, she beats Chop Top all on her own. She's actually a great female protagonist in that way. Leatherface, however, is portrayed... Actually, Leatherface is portrayed as a wonderfully nuanced horror character in a way that I was not expecting. Like I said, I do really identify with characters that have even a tangential tie to mental illness, so that's something that I can't shake. I enjoyed this movie, and I'm quite honestly going to give it 4 thumbs.
I like it. I actually had another thumb I wanted to give. If
sure.
I could, for Tom Savini, because you were talking about how fun the movie is. The special effects, especially with what he was working at that time, it is clear that guy really loves his job, and he made that movie fun. The look of the movie is really based on his designs and on all that work he did. So he gets an extra thumbs up from me.
Yeah, he does a great job. So I give it 4 thumbs. Who do my thumbs belong to? One belongs to Nubbins. Nubbins Sawyer, the dead brother who's sitting at the dinner table, who apparently has a grenade on him.
Right.
Great Grandma Sawyer, who's firmly got her thumb pressed on the button for the chainsaw, ready to go whenever she needs it. Another thumb is definitely going to go to... one thumb is going to go to Wendell, the police officer who tells Lieutenant Lefty that he's got to move on. This is a closed crime scene. Get on out of here before his friend shows up. Wendell, he gets a name.
Right.
And the last one is going to go to LG, because quite honestly, he managed to balance being a really close confidant friend and also kind of a sleazebag in the same character. That he was actually pretty three-dimensional in that way.
He might have been the worst friend-zoned character in the history of cinema.
He really was. He was really trying, too, at that one point. He was saying, like, hey, let's go get coffee. It's 10 at night. Let's go get... Oh, no, it's midnight. She established it's midnight in Texas. There's nothing going on. And he says, you want to go get coffee? He's like, no, I'll stay here. Yeah. So, that's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I want to thank Brandon Paine, my guest, for coming in. Is there anywhere people can find you?
Not really. I mean, I am...
Do you want people to find you?
Sure. You can always email me. I am a consultant if you're writing a movie or you're trying to figure out how to sell one.
How do they get in contact with you?
You can contact me by email, which is just pretty simple. It's Brandon, BRANDON.Paine, PAINE, the number 1 at gmail.com, and I'll leave you some business cards too, and if you have other guests that want it.
Perfect. We'll be sure to include that in the description with your permission or things like that.
Oh yeah. You got show notes nowadays.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we say goodbye?
No, this was fun.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, let me know if there's any feedback.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, everybody, thanks again for listening to what I believe was the 5th, maybe 4th. It's so cool that I don't know anymore. Episode of the Gory Days. Next week, we'll be talking about a brand new film. Be sure to check that out and tweet all of your thoughts, suggestions, things you loved, things you hated, things you loved to hate about that week's movie. Next week on the Gory Days, we'll be talking about a brand new film. I just said that. I'm just doing my wrap up. Stay scary out there.
The Gory Days.
If you want your thoughts on each week's movies heard on the podcast, follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at The Gory Days. And look for more episodes each and every week on the Apple Podcast app. See you next time.
The Gory Days.
So what film are you going to do next week?
I don't know.
Oh, that's awesome.
I haven't decided yet. I usually decide while I'm editing this one.
That's cool. What did you do? What other ones have you done?
We've done